joining us for another episode of A Case of the Mondays. I'm your podcast host, Rameez Kaleem, founder and CEO of 3R Strategy and author of A Case of the Mondays. I'm joined today by Deeba Ali, Head of People Services at Historic Environment Scotland. Today we'll be having a frank conversation about the real challenges facing people leaders and how we can finally move EDI from a nice to have to a core part of the people agenda. Deeba, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining us, and I'm looking forward to discussing EDI, or equity, diversity, inclusion, in more detail. But before we get into that, I'm just curious about the sector that you work in, which is, I guess, sort of a unique. I mean, I guess not completely unique, but it's a very different sector, and I'm just interested to hear about your experience working in this sector, and are there any particular people challenges that you're facing, or what would you say is your biggest people challenge right now?
So in terms of the sector, I've been in HR just under 23 years. This is my first public sector role. I've always worked in private sector, so very different to me, to what I'm used to. But in terms of the sector, it's exactly as you've said. It's very unique. We're the heritage sector. We look after all our monuments in Scotland. So exactly, it's very similar to Historic England, operating in the same way. This is probably the first time I've worked in an organisation in a sector where, people tend to be passionate about what they do because they, hopefully enjoy their jobs. But people in Historic Environment Scotland are so passionate about our properties. They're so passionate about the surroundings that they work in and the areas that they look after. And when I first joined just under 3 years ago, I did think it was very much just looking after the properties and exactly that. But the more I learned about the organisation, it's so unique because we have so many different areas that we look at. We employ people that look after our gardens, for example, and they're subject matter experts, and the level of detail that they're aware of is really impressive. But then we've got engineers, we've got stewards that look after all of our sites and our visitors. So there's so many different angles and so many different areas of Historic Environment Scotland, and everyone's just so equally passionate about what they do because it's Scotland's history. It's the heritage of Scotland, which people tend to be really passionate about regardless of what area they look at, particularly in the people team. You see it in there as well. And you would think working in the people team, you're looking after people elements. But it's the same. The dedication, the passion is very much the same. In terms of challenges, I would definitely say, and I've had to think about this, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't the same, whether it's public or private sector, is very much retaining talent and keeping the workforce engaged. I think engagement and, retention is a huge challenge right now, with people. In terms of retaining talent, I think that's a real challenge in the sense that the working population now no longer really just wants to come to work and get paid and get decent money and go home and that's it. People want a safe environment to work. People want a respectful environment to work. And I know we're going to talk about equity and things, but people want an inclusive environment. They want a focus on their wellbeing. They want work-life balance. And how we engage our people on that's really challenging as well. Because I think we need to be, a challenge that we come across is, are we engaging enough? Are we telling people enough? We don't want an environment where people think you're being really closed off and secretive or anything like that. So you want to keep people engaged, and I think that's a real challenge in making sure that you're engaging at the right level. And I think an engaged workforce is challenging right now because there's always going to be pockets of people that say that they're not engaged enough and they don't know enough in terms of what we offer as an organisation over and above just that you get paid at the end of the month.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because you talked about your sector and how it's unique and there are so many roles that are so different. But in terms of challenges, it's the challenges that most organizations across different sectors are facing around retention and engagement. It Because you specifically mentioned retention and engagement, it did remind me of this research by a company called Josh Bersin, where they talked about how well communicated, because we're talking about equity today as well, well communicated pay equity, they found was 13 times more impactful than in engaging and retaining employees than higher levels of pay. So we can sometimes spend so much time deciding what budgets we should have, whether it's 3%, 3.5%. How much does that really engage someone if they're thinking, oh, I'm going to get 3.5% increase instead of 3% increase, instead of really focusing on demonstrating to people that they're being treated in an equitable way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. Look at our organisation, and we are, like I said, we're public sector led. We're governed by Scottish Government, and in terms of when we do engage on pay and what that is, it's completely different to when we engage, for example, on, let's say we're implementing a really big project. People want to know and hear about how we're looking after them during that process. People want to know they want to feel engaged, that we're keeping them updated frequently enough. They want to know that their well-being is considered in that, their workload is being considered in that. And the biggest thing that comes up for us is, have we considered, is this possibly going to cause burnout, whether it's the people implementing the project or the people that are going to be on the receiving end of that? Because we've very recently just implemented a new pay and grading framework, and that was something that came up quite a lot. But in terms of burnout, what came up is when we implemented a 35-hour working week. We implemented a 35 hours with no detriment to anybody's pay. But the thing that came out is this going to cause burnout, because we're now reducing hours, but is the workload going to reduce at the same time? People wanted to feel that they were being engaged on that, and they were being spoken to regularly. Their input was invaluable in that process, and they wanted to know that they were being included in those conversations. And that's key, because you can go away and go, this is a great project, we'll use that department. Well, finance is important in this, HR is important in this, but what about the people? Because they're the ones that overall are going to be affected by this. And how you engage on things like that is really, really important to people, and rightfully so. It's their working conditions.
I mean, that's a great example of what you just mentioned around how we can look at creative ways of engaging and rewarding our employees when we may not necessarily, for example, have a budget for it. Because, like you said, there was no adjustment made to the salary, but if you're reducing your hours, there is a perception of, you're working less for more. But if you are, for example, impacted by something like, living wage, then again, you can impact something like that by reducing the hours and not having the budget to increase pay.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what it was. People wanted to know that, look, fair enough, it wasn't even about, okay, our salaries are remaining unchanged. It was just, how is that going to affect my work-life balance, and how is that going to affect my overall well-being at work? Because you're reducing the time I'm at work, but it's still expecting me to produce the same. And that's a fair point. That's a completely valid.
Yeah. Let's shift to something that I know you're passionate about, which is EDI, so equity, diversity, inclusion. And I think a lot of people, they get tired of seeing EDI used in a way that could be seen as a tick box or even a PR exercise. But what do you think is a good way to really make this a core part of the people agenda and get your leadership team on board? Is that something that you've had experience in or managed to do in your current role, or what tips would you have for other HR leaders?
That's a great question, actually, Rameez, because I'm super passionate about ED&I, and I've worked in organisations in the past where I personally or my team have been given ED&I as a project, and it's not a project. ED&I is something that it's exactly as you said, it needs to be on the agenda in an organisation. When I came to Historic Environment Scotland, I was blown away with how much we actually do as an organisation with EDI. So first thing that really impressed me is we actually have somebody dedicated. We actually have when I started, it was a person. We've now got a team that looks after equalities overall. So that was really good. And I remember having a conversation with our equalities manager. She said to me, Deeba, we're not really doing as much as we want to. And I was like, you have no idea how much we're doing. And it's really good because the organisations I've come from are barely scratching the surface. So in terms of getting on the agenda, in my experience and what's working really, really well is having right from your senior team, they need to be engaged. They need to be engaged, but they also need to be understanding of the fact that that's built in what we do. So in terms of whatever area that you looked after, whether it's finance, whether it's people, whether it's operations, that's some of the areas that we have. Equalities is such a large part in whatever that we're looking to deliver. Whether that is from a monetary perspective or a people perspective, it needs to be built into what you are delivering from your own agendas and your own strategy. So we personally have a people strategy, and as part of that people strategy, we have equalities outcomes that is led by us, but we work very, very closely with our equalities team on that. But every directorate has that. So we've got 7 directors that look after their own areas. They will all have their own equalities outcomes. To me, that's how you get equalities on the agenda, as your full senior team is, as well as making sure they stay in budget, as well as making sure they deliver, whether that is creating profit, as well as making sure they deliver on the projects. From my point of view, I can talk about people projects, but as part of that, we also have our own equalities outcomes that we're looking to achieve. And that's how you get it on the agenda. Having it as a project for somebody in your HR department is never going to work. You need to be committed to making change. You need to be committed to moving along with some of the legislation changes that are coming in, that are coming in quite frequently. We've had the recent High Court ruling. We need to have, we have been engaged on that. We've engaged with our people on that because it's an emotive subject and it affects people. So we've engaged our people on that, and we're looking at what we can do to support people, and as opposed to exactly what you've said, a tick box exercise. And again, I've worked in environments where it is a tick box exercise, but having experienced the other side of that, it's so important. It's so important making sure that when you're delivering on your strategies for the year, built into that is, what are your equalities outcomes? How are you going to affect overall equality in your organisation? And regardless of what department you work in, you can.
And it is something that frustrates a lot of people as well, because I think it's great that you are in an environment where this is seen as a priority. We're seeing in the US, for example, where they're getting rid of
Yes.
all the
Yes.
EDI teams. But I think a lot of people get frustrated, and I would say they probably had an impact on my career, where I just felt like, you almost see a ceiling, and I thought, I need to take charge of my own career, and then I left and
Absolutely.
I set up my own organization or consultancy. How do you measure the success? So you have a team that is working on this. Are there particular metrics that you look at to say, yes, this is working for us? So how do you measure that success?
It's a simple one for us. So we set ourselves as part of the equalities outcomes, as part of the equality plan. So we have an equality action plan, and like I said, as part of that, there's things that we need to deliver on. So the other thing that we do really well is we have an equality impact assessment in terms of big projects. So I have led on a resourcing transformation. So it's how we recruit, and that included a digital transformation because we were using a brand new system. But one of the things that we looked at in terms of how we measure success and equalities, and that is, what is the demographic? So what are our current demographics? So we've got data on that. And then what are the demographics going to look like in our workforce once we've completed this project, which we're at the sort of tail end of? What will the demographics look like in a year's time? So we're going to set ourselves SLAs in terms of what that looks like. The other thing that we've done is we're going to measure success on where we advertise. So because we're a heritage sector, we're seen as, we advertise, we look for, we advertise in very specific places. We look for example, university graduates, and that will always bring you the same group of people. So where it is we advertise and has that affected our demographics in the organisation, equal pay is a huge one. We're always reporting on our equal pay gap and where we're at with that. So these are all the measures of success that we've put in place, and we're going to report on just to see what improvements we've made on that. But that's one example because that's one project. So in everything that we do, we put in a qualities impact assessment because we're actually saying, here's the impact that we're going to have equalities when we deliver during the course of delivering this project. And that's something across historic environment Scotland that we do, as we do an equalities impact assessment and how we're going to deliver on improving inequalities as well, which some people will see as an onerous exercise because I get what you're saying. It can be frustrating, but you need to be committed to be part of that change. So whilst it's a long piece of work, it's a detailed piece of work, but actually the output is going to be so impactful, that's why I think it's a really, really good way to implement whether it's a project or a small, I don't know, like an objective that you're trying to achieve. I just think the impact of it is so huge from a qualities point of view, and it actually is able for us, particularly in the resourcing example that I've given you, I can actually go back and say, here's we delivered because we have put measures in place for us, and some of those measures are equalities based measures.
I mean, it's great to hear you talk about equal pay as well as a priority, because I think it's one of those things where, again, you might see organizations talking about, equity and diversity inclusion, but very few are doing things like equal pay audits, which really should be a basic requirement. And we're seeing things like the EU directive come in, which enforces some of this in the EU, but unfortunately, it's not going to. Or many CEOs I'm speaking to are finally happy about Brexit, thinking it's not going to impact us.
Yeah.
But I think that is quite a critical part of this, because it's, in some cases, it's not even necessarily that you have to make a lot of pay adjustments, but it's about demonstrating to employees that you are proactively looking at any pay disparities, and if there are something, that you will be adjusting them, even if it's not immediate, but over time when you have the budgets.
Absolutely, it's exactly that. So we don't just report on it; we actually report on it, and this is because we're public sector. We publish this for people to see of what we're doing, so we need to be doing more than just reporting on it. And the actually thing that we do over and above the equality pay, equal pay, is we're going to start reporting on an ethnicity pay gap as well. So that's huge because, again, when I was speaking to our equalities manager about this, I was like, as a minority, I couldn't believe I hadn't even thought of it. I was like, oh, I said, this is really good. I am actually so interested into seeing what the reportings are in public sector in general, because we these are all published for everybody to see. So we're going to report on that as well, but not just report on it. If there is a gap, what is it we're actively doing, and not just around, it'll be around creating opportunities in an equitable way, whether it's side steps, whether it's promotions, looking at the demographics across our board, because we're governed by a board, looking at demographics within our executive leadership team. I'm part of the senior leadership team looking at that, but actually just really demonstrating what we're doing about it actively, which is really useful as well. So there's so many things that are actually really, really easy over and above just reporting, because, I'm part of an organisation that does it. So if anybody that tells you that's difficult, whilst it's onerous, I get it, because everything that we do is onerous, whether it's equalities or not, because, some things can be like, we have to do this. But it's completely worth it, because actually, going back to the point we were talking about at the beginning, making, attracting talent and saying, here's all the things that are really important to us. You're going to go and want to work for an organisation like that, aren't you?
Yeah,
Particularly with the newer generation that's coming into work.
yeah, exactly. I mean, we're seeing a lot of research talking about gendered employees looking to work in organizations where they feel a sense of purpose, transparency, equity, and we're even seeing in some cases that they're willing to sacrifice on pay in order to work in that environment, rather than chasing the higher salaries. You mentioned something around you look at where you advertise to try and this is something we often see in a lot of organizations. Like, when you look at like graduate level or that early career level, you do see a lot of diversity, for example, in the organization. There's that ceiling, or you don't see any progression within the organization. Is that something you've looked at? And again, do you have suggestions on how organizations can address that issue or try and uh, see why there's lack of progression?
In terms of lack of progression, there is a number of things that we have actively done, and advice that I would give is we actually brought somebody external in, and again, we've got contacts through Scottish Government. So we brought in um, it's a racial equality committee, and it's somebody that actually works on it, who we work very closely with. And I was actually introduced to him in early days, and I thought, when I was looking at our recruitment, I thought, I'm actually going to get some insight into what we're missing. So we invited him in and showed him our big end-to-end recruitment process, including how we look to for succession planning and different. At the moment, we're still working on implementing our succession planning. So he kind of had a look at it and gave us some really, really, really good feedback. And one of the things that he did speak to us around was exactly that, is how we advertise, where we advertise. And we were so tunnel visioned in where we advertise, because we are the heritage sector. In the sector that we work in, we were targeting those areas. You're always going to get the same people applying. So we needed to have a look around, okay, first of all, what are we doing about our succession planning, which wasn't enough. We've now, as part of our people strategy, and I'm working very closely with one of my colleagues who's head of OD and wellbeing, and looking at how do we actually create a meaningful succession planning process. But at the side of that, as part of the recruitment process, we're looking at how do we start attracting talent? How do we start bringing in people from diverse backgrounds? How do we start on, creating a platform and an environment where people see that we are one of those employers that that sees that as really, really important. But at the side of that, we recruit in really rural areas, so you can imagine we cover like the Highlands and Islands, the Shetlands. So you can imagine what these areas are like. They're very small. The other thing we done is we just took advice from them. So let's say in Glasgow, right? I'm in the west of Scotland. There's things like Indeed, there's S1 jobs. That doesn't work up in the Highlands and Islands. And some of the feedback that we got is people actually go into their local shop and look at the wall to see what jobs are going. And I
Yeah.
was like, let's do it. Why are we saying, well, that doesn't work for us because we must advertise somewhere online? But this is what works for them. This is what they're familiar with their communities. Tap into your people that know about their communities where you're struggling to recruit, whether it's promotion or bringing in new people. And that's the kind of insight that is so pertinent in terms of how you look for people to progress, as well as bringing in new talent.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think for a lot of people, it wouldn't even occur to us to think outside of an online platform in
Absolutely.
advertising. Uh,
I remember the first conversation. They were like, "Look, can we get some posters?" And I was like, "Posters for what?" Posters are so dated. And I was like, they were like, "Honestly, there's literally people go to their local shops, and that's where you will start get people, because there was particular roles that can be difficult to recruit for, and the campaigns are lying open for months on end." And this was the first conversation. I was like, why are we not doing this? It's a no-brainer. I don't know this community. I'm not going to pretend to know it. We've got experts telling us that's what will work. So let's do it. So these are things that we're looking at doing, out of the box thinking, exactly that.
Great. So, there'll be a lot of HR professionals listening to this, and unless you've already mentioned your top tip, but if you did have one tip for HR leaders in whether it's EDI related or your other challenge around retention or engagement, what would that one tip be for our listeners?
I think the one tip I would give, which includes, the feeling included, it also includes a level of engagement, is just having, I think the word I'm looking for is humility. And what I mean by that is, as a leader, that I'll have some strengths, and you lead on that and you coach and you develop people on that. But there'll be some things where people around you have a core strength that you can rely on to help be a better leader. And that is what works well in my team, is there's core strengths in the team that I lean on and say, this is the area you're really, really good at. Let's go and deliver this collectively, but you're leading on it and I'm supporting on it. It doesn't always have to be because I'm the HR leader in my department. I'm leading on this, I'm delivering on it, and I'm responsible for it. It's actually having the humility to say, my business partner helped with that, or, the HR manager helped with that. It's actually just giving people credit where it's deserved and having the humility to say, there's a core strength in my team that I lean on, help deliver an objective or a project or, our people plan. And it works because I know that's the way I'm managed and it works for me. I know that there's core strengths that I'm used for. And it actually makes you feel really included. It makes you feel really engaged. It makes you feel ready to come to work the next day, because the last thing you want, when it's like, oh, it's a drag going into work, but or when your phone rings and it's your manager phoning you, it's not a drag. It's actually they're phoning me for advice on something that they might not necessarily be strong at. And it's having that humility that keeps people engaged and feel included.
Okay, thanks, Deeba, for all your insights and advice. I think there's a lot for our listeners and HR leaders to take away. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask the question that I ask all my guests, which is, what is your favorite film and why?
So my favourite film, and I'll actually add something to this, because I was actually talking to my kids. I've got two girls, and I said to them, my favourite movie of all time is The Green Mile, and they did ask me why, and we've watched it together, and they really enjoyed it. But it's one of the movies that I can watch quite a lot, and the reasons why I like it is the cast is phenomenal first and foremost, but the storyline, it's just got so much in it. It's got somebody's struggle. It's got a miracle working in it, and just the story itself. It's just so touching when you look at the time that's set in. But some of it is actually so true to current climate at the minute. If I wouldn't have said that probably about 10 years ago, but I can say it now. But it actually makes you feel really good watching it, and watching a number of diverse people coming together. It's whatever their backgrounds are, whatever their jobs are, and they all just really come together and end up really close in such an inspiring way. But the reason I wanted to come back to that was I was telling my two daughters that that's my favourite movie, and they told me to stop lying and to tell people that my favourite movie is actually Sing, which is one of the films that we watch together constantly. But I'll take the Green Mile one, as opposed to the one that they told me is my favourite.
Okay, no, we'll stick with The Green Mile because I think you linked it quite well to the whole topic of EDI as well. It definitely is. I think it came out in the 90s, I think.
Yes,
and
that's right.
so I definitely I remember seeing the film, and I can remember some scenes, but it's one of those where I think I probably need to watch it again to remember a lot of the story.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add
There's a
that to my
moment in
list.
it. There's actually a moment in it, and this is the bit that always gets me. It's the moment in it where the truth is revealed of what happens, and it's just so true to life, because there's so many misconceptions. There's so much conscious bias in terms of the judgment, the way he's judged, and how humble he is about it. But when the truth comes out, it's just completely, it's like such an earth-shattering moment, because it is so true to life. Especially, like I'm saying, in this current climate where people are making assumptions, race, let's be honest. But yeah, it's a definite one I would recommend to watch, and I've watched it so many times.
Great. I love it when a film suggestion or a favorite film always links back to the topic that we're discussing as well. So this has been a really insightful conversation, and there's been lots of tips, and thanks for sharing your challenges. And if people want to connect with you, what is the best way to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn. I can't say I'm overly active on it. I like to share when we're doing some inspiring team stuff, because the last time I shared was we had a team day out. We were doing some volunteering in a zoo, would you believe, which was an excellent day out. Some great bonding. We painted some benches, we planted plants. So I kind of as engaged as I can be on LinkedIn. But yeah, definitely on LinkedIn, I'm as active as the time allows me to be on that.
Great. So thanks again, Deeba. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again on the next episode of A Case of the Monday.
Enjoy this episode? Join the Academy for free and have access to CPD certified reward training, quarterly reward community sessions, first access to salary insights reports, reward and benefits market data, and hundreds of free practical tools and templates.